Welcome to my reflection video on this Practicum project with the Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan. Before I start, in my website I have included reflections on many of the elements of this project already. For example, my thoughts about my process and products can be found in the Field Notes weekly journal, and the impact of my plan can be found in the Plans tab under Wishlist and Project Plan. In this final video, rather than recap the areas I've already covered, I wanted to go back and explore my personal goals to see how well I was able to achieve them. So here we go. My first goal was to understand the cultural, language, and accessibility challenges faced by Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan and learn how to apply EDIA frameworks to my learning materials. This was likely the biggest challenge of this practicum. It was a huge learning curve to understand the differences of our learners and what the technologies we were using could provide, or where technology was lacking. In several cases, I produced work that I felt might be difficult or expensive to translate, but these were some of the products which got the best feedback, such as my introductory video for the course. It was appealing to create videos similar to that for the rest of the course, but I had doubts about who this would be for if it was only in English. Diversity is not only a matter of language, and technology often inadvertently created barriers, like Powtoon only offering 2 characters in their free plan that were wearing a hijab, and not allowing me to change a character's short sleeves and pants into something more conservative. I certainly learned about the challenges faced by Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan, and feel like this experience has prepared me to really put thought into the wide range of requirements that may come into play when it comes to the diversity of my potential learners. My second goal was to become more familiar with the ADDIE process and use it to design and execute a project plan. Did I follow the ADDIE process? Yes and no. When I first began this practicum, I found the analysis stage to be frustrating as the members of Canadian Women for Women were busy, and so a lot of my analysis needed to be independent research. It was a pleasant surprise to find myself working with a team of MET students, and the 3 of us were able to come up with a wish list to request more direct information from the organization. The design phase was much more fluid than I had expected. My team ended up creating a plan of everything that could go into a course, and then tackled this impossible feat one module at a time. We ended up completing the most necessary sections first and leaving others to future practicum students. The implementation and evaluation phases were more like a presentation phase to the organization, sending it for feedback within the staff rather than seeing how well it worked for actual students. I'm not actually upset at this deviation from the exact step-by-step procedures of ADDIE. I do feel more familiar with the process, but I also feel confident that it is possible to be flexible with this format and nevertheless produce helpful products within a fixed timeline, regardless of whether I followed my initial plan precisely. I call this a success. My third goal was to analyze the needs of Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan and explore new technologies and become more proficient with educational technologies in order to produce tools that are useful and engaging. When I began this project, I had almost no knowledge of Moodle or Big Blue Button, which turned out to be helpful to me when trying to teach it to others. I often had to sift through videos on YouTube and tutorials on the Moodle Academy site, which gave me great insight to what was lacking, or hard to find. I created a lot of videos during this practicum. As I progressed, I learned what tools made useful platforms for storyboards and what tools helped in making screen capture videos more clear to learners. By the end of the 13 weeks, I could efficiently produce videos with elements that helped to focus the learners' attentions on the steps they were following, such as callouts, zoom, or magnification, while ensuring these projects were easy to modify for others in the future by adding common elements to the library so they could be reused. Because the organization was still waiting for funding before my project was complete, I needed to use the basic version of any of the tools. This was disappointing, but also led me to some interesting workarounds, like hiding a character's legs behind invisible screens so that it wasn't noticeable that she was wearing skinny jeans. In the future, I'll keep these low-budget tricks up my sleeve for any other organizations who need them. Was our product useful? The feedback we received from our supervisors in the organization was positive. It certainly could be used as is for English-speaking teachers. Unfortunately, it was hard to ascertain how well it lent itself to translation, as the budget for translation only became available at the very end of this project. Overall, it was a good experience for me, not only in learning new tools, but learning how to use them with a fixed budget and fluctuating organizational needs. And finally, my fourth goal was to personally evaluate my work in order to create lessons learned and a way forward which will impact my future instructional design projects. A major takeaway from this practicum was that when providing a learning tool to an organization, ultimately it was me who was the expert in instructional design, not them. This was important when taking into account the needs of Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan and choosing what I felt to be the right tool, rather than simply creating the products they were requesting. When we first looked at how to teach Moodle, the organization had envisioned an FAQ page where learners could go and find videos to respond to their questions. But based on our assessment that the learners might not even know what questions to ask because they needed the basic elements of the course first, we changed the plan and created something more suitable. It also meant that I appreciated the feedback I received, but often needed to make decisions on which ideas should be pursued, especially since some of them unintentionally contradicted themselves. For example, creating lots of flashy but difficult to translate videos did not seem like a good plan. An important lesson that I learned was asking the right questions. From the start, we had a lot of trouble narrowing down who our learners were. As it turned out, the organization as a whole was grappling with this question. As an instructional designer, I might have been able to help more with solving this issue had I realized that it was not just the MET students that were confused by this problem. In the future, I will be more confident about speaking up when I feel like an organization needs to examine some of the key parts of their plans. Ultimately, I had to make some educated guesses about our learners. It was definitely limiting not to have access to them in a more direct way in order to assess their needs from an instructional design perspective, but my takeaway was to learn to provide tools with low floors and high ceilings with options that suited the needs of a wide range of students. Another learning point for me was in managing my own expectations with respect to design. I was very ambitious when I took on this course, and I really wanted it to look professional and interactive. I had to temper my design plans when I realized that the primary concern was a format that was accessible to the learners. I also learned the limitations of Moodle. I tried lots of the elements available, which might have made the course format more fun, but simultaneously put it out of reach for our beginner students. In the end, it was not a waste of time to try all these elements, such as diverging lessons, blocks, quizzes, and questionnaires, because I now have a better working knowledge of Moodle. This practicum was also a learning experience for me to work with an NGO. Here are some of my takeaways from this. A charitable organization has no end to the amount of work that could be accomplished. Sometimes this can make it difficult to narrow the scope and find out what was really needed and could be accomplished. I think our system of creating a course outline and completing the most important lessons first was a good compromise of our time and their goals. Another aspect of a charitable organization is that everyone is very busy, as well as geographically spread out. This meant that sometimes responses could be slow when we were looking for feedback, and we had to be aware of time constraints when planning meetings. One of my reflections was that I might have taken on more work, but because I had to make my own plan, find my partners, arrange communications, and conduct research without access to the students, everything took longer. One takeaway was to produce good legacy documents for future practicum students so that hopefully they will be able to jump into the project work faster. Another was to arrange a better plan for feedback. I felt like we were constantly peppering our supervisors with material for them to review. This might have been handled better if we had decided from the beginning on how they would be reviewing our material. The final takeaway of working with an NGO was flexibility. Government funding was delayed, staff had holiday, and organizational needs changed. It was important to be able to adapt our plan to fit these challenges. Overall, I got a lot from this practicum, and in turn, I hope that Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan will ultimately benefit from what I've created. If you haven't had a chance, please feel free to look through the rest of this site for further insights and the products created in this course. Thanks for watching.